The village of Oakhaven existed in a perpetual twilight, even at noon. Not from an eternal eclipse, but from the crushing weight of generations of hardship that had slowly, insidiously, leached the color from its very stones, the laughter from its children, and the light from its elders' eyes. Imagine a world where the night sky, once a tapestry of cosmic diamonds, had become a mocking void, reminding everyone of the light they lacked. A place where the whisper of hope had long been silenced by the rasp of hunger and the chill of despair. This was Oakhaven, nestled deep within a forgotten valley. Its people bent not just by toil, but by an unseen burden that pressed down from the grey, indifferent skies above the jagged peaks of the Whispering Mountains. It was into this muted existence that Alara was born, a wisp of a girl whose spirit, even then, seemed to possess a defiant spark. Her eyes, the colour of peat moss after a spring rain, held a depth that belied her tender 14 years. While others moved through their days with the heavy gait of oxen, shoulders slumped under loads both visible and invisible, Alara walked with an uncommon grace, her gaze often sweeping the horizon, not for threats, but for possibilities. Her resilience wasn't a loud, defiant roar. It was the quiet persistence of a mountain flower pushing through a cracking granite, tenacious, vibrant, and utterly uncompromising in its will to live. Oakhaven clung to the banks of the Serpent River, a narrow ribbon of water that offered life, but also threatened to reclaim it with every harsh winter flood. The houses were cobbled affairs of rough-hewn timber and mud bricks, their thatch roofs perpetually sagged, worn smooth by countless storms. Smoke curled lazily from their chimneys, carrying the scent of wood smoke and the meager evening meal. Daily life was a relentless cycle dictated by the sun and the seasons. From dawn, Ilera's routine mirrored that of every other young woman in Oakhaven. She would rise before the first hint of color touched the eastern sky, her hands calloused from years of drawing water from the communal well, the wooden bucket heavy and cold against her skin. The chill morning air would bite at her exposed arms as she meticulously ground grain into flour, using a stone quern, the rhythmic rasp a constant backdrop to the village's awakening. Her fingers nimble and accustomed to repetitive tasks, would then move to mending the family's threadbare garments, patching holes with scraps of fabric dyed with weak vegetable dyes, each stitch a silent testament to frugality and the hope that these clothes would last just one more season. The historical realities of Oakhaven were not recorded in grand scrolls, but etched into the lines on its people's faces, in their hunched pastures, and the folklore whispered around crackling fires. Generations before, a devastating blight had swept through the valley, wiping out the staple crops and leaving a legacy of scarcity that permeated every aspect of life. Food was never truly abundant, and the memory of hunger was a constant, gnawing presence. Illness, too, was a formidable foe. Without proper medicine, a simple cough could escalate into a deadly fever, and childbirth was often a gamble. Alara herself had lost a younger sister to the coughing sickness just 2 winters prior, a grief that had settled deep within her, but had not extinguished her inner light. Instead, it seemed to fuel a quiet determination, a refusal to let the darkness claim everything. Her grandfather, Old Man Theron, was one of the few who still remembered stories of a time when Oakhaven was not quite so grey. He spoke of vibrant festivals, of bards who sang tales of heroes and magic, and of a night sky so brilliantly studded with stars that it felt as though the heavens themselves had descended to whisper secrets. But even his voice was now mostly a raspy sigh, his eyes often distant, lost in the mists of fading memories. Most villagers dismissed his ramblings as the fanciful delusions of an old man, preferring to focus on the tangible, immediate struggles. Yet, Elara listened. She absorbed his words, not as mere tales, but as faint echoes of a truth that perhaps still existed, dormant, waiting to be rediscovered. The fairy tale element, the metaphorical stars, wasn't a sudden, magical revelation for Elara. It began as a whisper, a gentle tugging at the edges of her perception. One particularly bleak afternoon, while gathering wild herbs on the precarious slopes above the village, she stumbled upon a patch of vivid blue forget-me-nots blooming stubbornly amidst the grey rocks. Their tiny, resilient blossoms seemed to defy the pervasive dullness of the landscape. As she carefully plucked a few, she noticed a tear tracing a path down the cheek of Lyra, a young girl from the village whose favourite wooden doll had broken during a rough play. The child's quiet despair, so reflective of the larger gloom that hung over Oakhaven, struck Elara. Without a word, Elara took one of the blue flowers, its colour so intensely pure, and carefully tucked it into the doll's mended dress. "Look," she whispered, her voice a soft murmur, "a piece of the sky, just for her." Lyra's eyes, wide and tear-filled, slowly focused on the tiny blue bloom. A small, tentative smile, like the first ray of sun after a long storm, began to spread across her face. It was then, in that fleeting moment, that Elara felt it, a tiny spark, not of magic in the traditional sense, but of something equally powerful. It was the sensation of light being ignited within the soul, a flicker of forgotten wonder. It wasn't a tangible star, but it felt like one, bursting forth in the deep, personal darkness of a child's sorrow. This incident, seemingly insignificant, marked a turning point for Elara. She began to see these stars everywhere, not as physical objects, but as tiny moments of beauty, acts of kindness, shared laughter, or simple joys that could pierce the gloom. She noticed the intricate pattern on a discarded bird's feather, the surprising sweetness of a wild berry, the warmth of a shared ember from a neighbor's hearth. Each observation, each small appreciation, was a star she mentally collected, polishing it with her attention, holding it close to her heart. She started to understand that hope wasn't a grand, unattainable treasure hidden beyond the mountains. It was woven into the very fabric of their daily lives, if only one knew how to look for it. The challenge, however, was in sharing these stars. How could she convince a community consumed by the drudgery of survival, where pessimism had become a communal shield against inevitable disappointment, that these ephemeral stars held any true value? The adults of Oakhaven had long since shed their childhood wonder, their minds focused on calluses, cracked earth, and the empty ache in their stomachs. They regarded Elara's quiet contemplation of a cloud-esque shape, or her gentle humming of a forgotten tune as peculiar, perhaps even a dangerous distraction from the harsh realities. "Child, best spend your time mending nets than staring at the sky," her own mother would often sigh, her voice weary but not unkind. Yet, Elara persisted. She began to subtly weave these stars into the mundane fabric of their days. While fetching water, she would pause to trace the delicate veins of a leaf for a younger child, explaining how it drank sunlight. While grinding grain, she might hum a melody she'd overheard her grandfather softly intoning, a forgotten lullaby that seemed to carry the scent of ancient spring blossoms. She wasn't preaching, or even speaking of stars directly. She was simply presenting them, offering them as quiet gifts. She observed the worn hands of Old Man Borin, a retired potter who spent his days carving intricate patterns onto small, discarded pieces of wood. Most saw it as idleness, but Elara saw the beauty in his focused concentration, the quiet pride in his finished work. She would sit beside him, not asking questions, but simply admiring the emerging shapes, and sometimes she would leave him a single, perfectly smooth river stone, a small, unspoken acknowledgement of the beauty he created. These were her early attempts at planting stars, not grand gestures, but small, deliberate acts of noticing, valuing, and sharing the tiny glimmers of light that still existed, however faint, in their twilight world. The initial reactions were often dismissive glances, a shrug, or simply a perplexed look. But sometimes, just sometimes, she would catch a fleeting softening of a furrowed brow, a momentary pause in the relentless rhythm of toil, a tiny spark of recognition in an otherwise indifferent eye. It was enough. It was the faintest beginning of a revolution of the heart, a silent promise that Oakhaven might one day remember the brilliance of the forgotten night sky.